Hello and welcome to MIP TV, and with me as always, Bob Cook for his regular book review. And in this edition, we've got a firm favourite author, and that, of course, is Irvin Yalom.
Yeah.
A lot of books you've reviewed, so if you're watching this, have a look in the playlist because there's a number of books Bob's reviewed. But this is his latest book. It's available on Audible, so it's an audio book, and it's called Becoming Myself, a Psychiatrist Memoir. Ooh, sounds interesting. What's title do you fancy with this, Bob?
Well, it's his last one, and maybe the last one he'll write, because he's 86 now.
Yeah.
You can get in paperback. It's 2017. And the whole book is really about how he became himself.
Oh.
So it's from the beginning of his life up until where he is now, and he's 86. And the remarkable thing about Irvin Yalom is that 86 years of life, he still sees 2 or 3 clients a week. He cycles to his office from his abode, and he's pretty fit, and he's quite a remarkable man. He started his life really, if we're talking about careers, as a medical. He was a medic.
Oh, how interesting!
A medical student,
the physician first and foremost.
Yeah, became a medical doctor, and then he got very interested, of course, in psychiatry, and then went on to be a psychiatrist. And he then went on to write probably the most, I would say, is his most famous book. Some people might argue, but influenced many generations of existential therapists, because he was perhaps, I don't know, Rollo May was probably as famous as him. They were great friends, by the way.
Yeah.
But Rollo May, Irvin Yalom, 2 of the greatest existential psychotherapists of our time. And in fact, Irvin Yalom was at Rollo May's death. You know, he was actually there when he died.
Blimey.
Yeah, Rollo May was a great friend of Irvin Yalom. They really were. And I forget what he died of. I think it was cancer. But anyway, Irvin Yalom was there, and he talks about it in his book. And but anyway, Yalom was first and foremost an existential psychotherapist. And he wrote this book called Group Psychotherapy in the early 50s. Went on to be a bestseller and influenced many of the existential therapists in the human potential movement in the 60s and early 70s.
Yeah, and when we're talking about existential, so we kind of just outline what that is, Bob. When someone considers themselves an existential therapist, how does that define them? What is their their kind of system? I was going to say belief system, but that's a bit contrary to existentialism, isn't it?
Well, they're exploring the very elements of our human existence. So they will really go to core issues, such as unknowing, such as death, such as birth, what human destiny means, and talking about real core issues of meaning, and the sense of meaning, and the sense of powerlessness, loss, the real early issues about our existence.
And that's what it really comes down to. Existentialism is an extension of existence, isn't it? And why are we here in the world, and what are we doing, and you know, what a purpose do we serve? All these that would be classed as existential questions. And if we're not answering those, we'd have existential angst. We'd worry about not being able to answer those questions.
Yeah. He believed very strongly in the death anxiety, which of course Freud did. Yeah, but all those things, yes, Yalom would be known for talking about. He went and explored many of the early encounter groups. He went into many of the early groups. There were many of them in the early 70s in America. Est was another one. But he came out with this book. I forget when it came out, but it was a really important book. I think it was late 60s, early 70s. And it really took him to stardom, which was called Group Psychotherapy, an existential study.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word stardom, because he is in the world of therapy a rock and roll star, isn't he? is a genuine phenomena, you
Mm.
know, and he's so well known at student level, at practice level. He's so well known. So just getting back to this book, Bob, is there anything particular that's helpful for us to know within the chapters?
Yes, I think what comes over more than anything else in this book really is a story of a really humane person.
Oh,
Somebody who really has a sense of strong morality, integrity, sincerity, and words of wisdom from beginning to end for the beginning and seasoned practitioner. A very wise man.
yeah. So yes, as you say, this is his last book, and he's getting on in years.
86.
Yeah, so this may very well be, and we don't want to wish him ill, but it could be his swan song of a book.
Yeah, you're right. But you know what he does in this book very well, and probably answering the question in another way, which was, you know, what will students, psychotherapists make of this book? He goes through and gives a sort of précis of why he wrote, or what was behind most of his books that he wrote. So, for example, let's take one of his most popular books, which is Love's Executioner. So that's an early book. I think it was probably late 70s. But it was one of his most popular, well-known books. And Irvin Yalom would call himself a storyteller more than anything else, I think.
Yes.
Part of himself. And he wanted to educate beginning psychotherapists, seasoned practitioners through creative stories about his psychological tales, if you like. And Love's Executioner was a marvelous book about some of his clients, which he had for some time and helped in their therapeutic cure, if you like. But he told it through narrative and storytelling.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful book. And he's well known for that book.
Yes, it's probably his most famous book, isn't it?
I think so. In that sort of narrative storytelling fashion.
And in terms of this book, Bob, he's reflecting on his life as a practitioner. He's using that storytelling technique to share these words of wisdom and observations about being a therapist and an existential therapist, life's truths.
That's right, because if you go through the books, we've got the book called Schopenhauer Cure. We've got Why Nietzsche Wept. We've got that wonderful book on death anxiety, which is called Staring in the Sun. So any budding therapist who wants to look at and understand how to work with death anxiety with people, that's a fantastic book. It gives a model and also gives tips and stages of how to work with people with death anxiety. He wrote another wonderful book, which I've reviewed here, called Lying on the Couch.
Yes.
All about how to work with deceit and manipulation.
Yes.
Which is an amazing book. He wrote another fantastic book called Mama and the Meaning of Life, which is about his youth and his passage through life, which he really self-disclosure, if you like. He realized that most of his life he'd been attempting to match up to his mother's expectations. And he talks about the internalized mother in his head for most of his life. And of course, these are those gifts and tips for psychotherapists on how to desensitize the internalized messages in your own head. However, he does go on to say in that book that he was ruled for most of his life with this whole process of living up to his mother's expectations. So that's another very interesting book.
Interesting one, that, isn't it? The injunctions or the conditions of worth and interjected values in the humanistic world.
Yeah, it's all there. And as I say, he had a great friendship with Rollo May, which is a really friend of yours in the psychotherapy literature.
Yes, I didn't know him personally, Bob, but well, yes, he's
existential writing. I mean,
yes, in terms of the humanistic movement, he's a bridge, really. I think between you know, those in the psychoanalytical field and the humanistic field. He tends to bridge those two disciplines very well, I think, Roland.
He does. And also, Irvin Yalom in this book praises a great hero of yours, and mine, by the way, Carl Rogers.
Oh, yeah, of course, the Oak Park man. The very man himself, yes.
And Irvin Yalom also goes through many of the early people in the potential movement, like he talks about Eric Berne a little bit, Gestalt therapy comes in, Rogers, Rollo May. He really is he's a person who's met so many people. They've all influenced him. But what comes over most of all with this person is the humanity of life and how loved he was.
And still is. And maybe the book is worth listening to just for that, to hear the humanity of someone who is we've kind of identified as a bit of a rock and roll star in the world of therapy.
He wrote that book, of course, which I think you've got and you've talked about, which is the gift of therapy, which was written for young psychotherapists. Words of wisdom. I think it's 50 tips for beginning students. He called it the gift of therapy. And he was saying off air just before he started that he must have every couple of years, certainly in recent times, in the last 10, 20 years, written books, because I think he's written about 18 or 19 books over his career. He's been a pretty big writer.
Yeah, he has, hasn't he? And he's still publishing them. So we're going to put a link in the bar below, in the comments section below, downstairs, to where you can buy the book and examine it. As always, Bob doesn't get paid for book reviews. He does it for the love of it. And we've been looking at today Irvin Yalom, Becoming Myself, a psychiatrist memoir.
Yes, psychiatrist memoir.
A psychiatrist memoir.
He started his life as a medical doctor, then a psychiatrist, and then a psychotherapist, and an existential psychotherapist. It's just a whole memoir through his life.
So if you want to look at the arc of his journey, that's the book to read. And as always, Bob Cook, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.